In the glass lobby of a downtown tower, sunlight split across polished marble and quarterly reports, and a small, incongruous object sat like a question, a bright red toy disc beside a wheelchair. The sound of footsteps was precise and corporate, heels tapping like a metronome that counted the distance between people. A janitor in a faded blue jumpsuit paused in the aisle, the handle of his broom resting on the floor, and for a moment the broom looked less like a tool and more like a baton. He walked toward the wheelchair as if crossing a country, his palms a little raw from work, and then he did something that did not belong on this map of power. He asked, quietly, "May I have this dance?" The question landed like an error in a script everyone was reciting. The woman in the chair did not answer with words. Her eyes were tired, and there was a silence lodged behind them, a year of small closures. A camera light glinted from a corner, a PR team always ready to harvest human angles, but what happened next could not be priced. He swept the broom in a small turn, not to clear dust, but to make a circle, and he invited movement where none had been expected. Someone gasped. A cell phone shuddered. Outside, a distant rain began, sharp against the glass. The billionaire mother, who held volume and reputation in her fingers, watched from the elevator, her face a map of strategy. "What are you doing?" she said, voice tight with ownership. He answered with something steadier than fear. "She is not broken. She is waiting to be asked." The lobby shrank around that line. It promised change that laugh dared to complete. If this first image touches you, stay, because what looks like a small kindness will set off a series of reckonings that affect a family, a company, and a promise of recovery that no spreadsheet had imagined. The billionaire mother, Vivian Hale, carried authority like a coat. Her shoes clicked like verdicts. When she stepped from the elevator, the air seemed to fold around her, cool and decisive, smelling faintly of lavender and high-end cologne. She approached with a voice cut to administrative edges. "Marcus, you know the protocols," she said. "There are stakeholders. We cannot have unauthorized performances in the lobby." Marcus smiled in the kind of way that respects rank but keeps a private ledger of small mercies. "Madam Hale, it is not a performance," he said. "It is a request." A receptionist, Lena, clutched a tablet and watched the ripples. Sam, the security guard, hovered with a hand on his radio. The local PR coordinator, Daniel, blinked, calculating image value. Vivian's anger was not sudden. It was an instrument tuned over decades. "This company protects its image," she said, sharp as a ledger line. "You know the board will want explanations." Emma Hale, the girl in the wheelchair, had the hush of someone who had been protected until protection became a kind of confinement. She turned her face toward Marcus like a small moon acknowledging a distant tide. The tension braided into the moment. A mother who equates care with control, a janitor who uses a broom as a bridge, a child who needs invitation more than intervention. The threat, implied and immediate, was clear: reputation against recovery. Marcus placed his broom at rest and said, calm, "If asking is a breach, then let my breach be one of kindness." The exchange left the lobby with a new weight, one that would follow them into conference rooms and hospital halls. The proposal appeared like a memo, but with moral teeth. Vivian approached her son's case as she approached acquisitions. Data first, sentiment second. She offered an arrangement that read like an image management contract. "We will enroll Emma in a top-tier rehabilitation program," she said to Marcus in a tone that paired charity with conditions. "You can volunteer there, under supervision. There will be press releases. The board will, in time, look favorable." Marcus listened, fingers tracing the broom handle, a small compass for his steady hands. "I do not want press," he said. "I want her to move for herself, not for a photo op." The PR man, Daniel, interjected with a smile made of spreadsheets. "Media exposure could accelerate funding," he said. "It could also be controlled narrative." Vivian's offer sat like a checkbook placed face up on a table. "We need wins," she added. "We need to show stakeholders that we care and that the legacy portfolio reflects socially responsible leadership." Marcus thought of the broom's worn bristles, of the many rooms he had seen where people are kept tidy but not seen. "If you make her part of a narrative before she chooses to live it," Marcus replied, "you are buying a story, not a life." Silence hovered. Lena shifted, Sam tightened his jaw, and Emma watched the adults arrange the world around her. Marcus made a decision that was part moral and part instinct. He would accept a restricted volunteer position, but on his terms. No staged moments, no photo-first therapy, only work that centered Emma's agency. It was a small, risky negotiation, one that set the stage for intimacy to enter an environment designed to prevent it. In the quiet after the offer, Marcus thought of his own backstory, of why a broom had become a symbol of reaching. He would later tell it, a patchwork of childhood, training, loss, and present purpose. Marcus had been raised in a block of row houses, where his mother swept the front stoop every Saturday without fail. As a child, he learned to make straight lines with a broom and to listen long to the people who watched from windows. He studied vocational carpentry, then hospitality maintenance, and he always carried a deep curiosity about people that surprised those who met him at first glance. In his 20s, he volunteered at community centers, learning how small acts could rearrange a day. The shock that reshaped him came in his 30s when his wife, Anna, fell ill. He balanced hospital bills and graveyard shifts, bargaining with time so that he could be present while also paying for care. When Anna died, something in Marcus closed and then opened. Grief, paradoxically, taught him how to offer presence without collapse. He trained informally in restorative movement techniques at a neighborhood center because he noticed how rhythm loosened people in ways words could not. Now, years later, Marcus cleaned towers of glass and aluminum, and he found ways to weave those grooves of care into a job that most thought invisible. He kept a box of small discs and a battered tape recorder in his locker. The disc, an odd talisman, the recorder to capture the cadence of laughter when it came. His motivation was both practical and sacred, to give others the invitation he did not have the authority to demand. This backstory is not a justification, but a map of why a janitor would risk a reprimand. Vivian Hale's backstory came from a different grammar. She had been raised in private schools, her mornings scheduled like shareholder reports. Her father built a company from a garage and taught her to value control as survival. Vivian worked her way up through mergers, learning the language of margins and the authority of a signed checkbook. She married into capital, then conquered it, fashioning an empire that used philanthropy as a lever and image as currency. Her life showed that power could be managed and that reputations were as fragile as glass facades. 2 losses had hardened her further: an early betrayal by a partner who leaked plans, and the public scandal that nearly cost her board a key investor. These wounds trained her to preempt vulnerability with policy. She believed that care could be commodified into elegant programs if the optics were right. Her love for Emma had grown precise and protective, but often it took the shape of transactions: the best doctors, the safest cars, the most discreet therapies. Beneath her armor, somewhere, was a woman who feared the world would take what she loved without compensation. That fear made her cautious and sometimes cruel. The arc of her backstory explains why she reacted to a broom like it was an unbudgeted risk, why she saw a small dance as an unpredictable expense. Her life had taught her to measure everything, including affection. Marcus's volunteer hours became a rhythm. He arrived at the rehabilitation center early, the air inside smelling of antiseptic and lemon, and he moved through corridors where laughter and machines coexisted. Dr. Rivera, the lead physical therapist, had a soft voice and a clipboard full of conservative plans. Rosa, the occupational therapist, smelled of coffee and lavender and favored bright scarves. Emma's assigned therapist, John, had a careful way of naming tiny successes. Marcus shadowed the therapists and began to suggest movement games that used discs, sound, and simple balance, tools he had seen coax smiles at street performances. The first session was a negotiation of space and trust. John and Marcus exchanged ideas, the therapists cautious, Marcus earnest. Start with a reachable goal, John suggested. Make it repeatable and safe. Marcus nodded. And make it joyful, Marcus replied. People will try things for joy before they try them for therapy. The session unfolded into a set of choreographed improvisations. Marcus rolled a disc across the floor. Emma's fingers twitched, and a tiny laugh worked free like a trapped bird. The scene needed 5 to 6 sensory touchstones. Warm sunlight on the vinyl floor, the metallic beep of a monitor, the texture of a rubber disc under fingertips, the taste of mint gum Marcus kept in his pocket, the smell of paint from an art corner. These details stitched the moment into memory. The therapists recorded metrics: range of motion, reaction time, voluntary engagement. Marcus suggested a playful progression that therapists could quantify, from prompting to independent initiation, measured over a 4-week cycle. He explained a procedural detail for how therapy integration with community volunteers would be monitored. Sessions should be logged daily, with a baseline score given in the first week and incremental improvement percentages recorded weekly. Confidentiality must be protected by consent forms signed by guardians that outline permitted media exposure. This technical note clarified responsibilities in 300 characters and assuaged certain fears, translating Marcus's intuition into a process that could be audited. As sessions accumulated, a small progress appeared. Emma began to reach for the disc without prompting. The first unprompted reach was not dramatic. It was a finger stretch, a blink, and then a breath that sounded like astonishment. Marcus and John exchanged a look that conveyed equal parts strategy and delight. They spoke in a longer, more textured dialogue to coax habits into behavior. "Emma, can you touch the disc?" John asked softly. "Can you do it when you choose to?" Emma looked at Marcus, whose palms smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and a life lived close to others. Marcus crouched low to eye level and said, simply, "When you want it, take it." She did, slowly. "Again," Marcus offered. The small repetition became ritual. "Again," Emma whispered. "Again." Lena from the front desk peeked in, a gentle smile surprised on her face. "I think she smiled," Rosa breathed. "Things to document," John said, voice light. They documented. They measured range of motion 3 degrees wider this week than last, and they wrote qualitative notes about affect. This scene used 5 sensory cues: the squeak of sneakers, the warm light on plastic, the scent of sanitizer, the grit of the disc's edge, the metallic tang of the monitor. The small victory circulated on the center's internal reports as a promising outlier, but Marcus kept insisting on privacy in how they celebrated it. The therapists, while cautiously optimistic, began to lobby for a wider program. Marcus now faced a new internal advocates who wanted to scale what they saw, and a mother whose PR tastes smelled like headlines. At roughly a third of the way through this story, a short pause arrives, a beat for the audience to reflect and to engage. If this moment found you breathing differently, know you are not alone. If this touched you, please tell us below. What was the time someone offered you a small dance when you needed one most? Share it in the comments so we can build a list of tiny kindnesses that change days and lives. Your stories help others feel less alone. Did someone hand you a cup of coffee when you could not stand? Did someone pick up your groceries when the world was heavy? Write one sentence or a small paragraph about that gesture. Your comment might give courage to someone who needs to reach out to another person today. Now, let us continue and see what happened when that small reach became visible to a world that measures worth in clippings and endorsements. That visibility arrived faster than anyone wanted. A junior PR intern, eager and under pressure to produce metrics, leaked a short, hopeful clip to social. It was a 10-second shot. A disc, a hand, a smile. The clip went viral in hours. Marcus watched the numbers go up like weather. Vivian watched them too, and her expression hardened into a forecast. "We need to control this narrative," she told Daniel, who was already rehearsing language about stewardship and careful engagement. "We should highlight the program as our initiative," Daniel said. "It demonstrates corporate responsibility and will secure the board." Marcus received both praise and a cease and desist. praise from strangers, and a directive from the center to restrict outside volunteers until legal releases were signed. Sam, the security guard, once purely logistical, found himself policing goodwill. Marcus argued for Emma's right to choose her exposure. She decides when she wants attention, he insisted. If you make this a spectacle, you will take her agency. The debate moved into a staff meeting where charts were laid out, emails read aloud, and the word legacy fluttered like a moth around a lamp. Vivian, cornered by optics and opportunity, called a private meeting with Marcus. I will fund a dedicated studio and practitioners if you will help us shape a replicable protocol, she said. We can scale this, we can change lives and be recognized. Marcus felt the old rhythm of negotiation, of trade-offs, money in exchange for shape, urgency in exchange for control. The tension in this moment stretched over 2 paragraphs of memory, the fear of commodifying healing and the painful practicality of required funding. He asked for one thing: no staged moments, no cameras without consent. Vivian measured him with a look that contained checkbooks and board minutes. We can agree to that, she said. Her voice had the soft iron of someone who believes promises can be clauses. The midpoint miracle moment came not. It happened in a small therapy room where the light through the blinds made stripes on the floor like slow bars of applause. Emma had been practicing balance shifts using a disc and a steady hand. Marcus stood behind with a palm at her back, not to force, but to steady trust. John counted softly. 1, 2, 3. Emma shifted her weight, her toes tucked against the footrest, and then she placed one foot, with help, on the floor for the first time. The room held its breath. The sound of a monitor clicked, but for a second the only sound was a soft exhale that was almost a laugh. Marcus whispered, "Do you feel that?" Emma's eyes shone. "Yes," she said, a small sound that tilted the moment into joy. The therapists cheered softly, papers rustling like leaves. The scene needed 500 to 600 characters of tension to explain what happened internally. A memory flooded Marcus's chest of teaching his late wife to shift weight after surgery. A fear that he would lose the moment to cameras, the moral calculus of whether to protect Emma's privacy or to let the world see a proof. He decided in the moment that proof without permission was theft. "We will celebrate privately first," he insisted, hugging regulation to compassion. The staff agreed. The moment rippled outward. Dr. Rivera sent an internal email noting measured improvement, and the center logged a new percentage increase in voluntary initiation. The floor discs became more than objects. They became markers on a map of recovery. People who had been watching from the margins, Rosa, Lena, Sam, felt the floor tilt toward hope. The sensory palette of that scene was rich. The grainy texture of the disc underfoot, the smell of lemon cleaner and basil from a nearby plant, the cool tile against the toes, the tang of metal from the walker leaning against the wall, and the warmth of human skin where hands met backs. It was a moment that promised more than a single step. After the midpoint, bonds deepened. Marcus, Emma, John, Dr. Rivera, Rosa, Lena, Sam, Daniel, and even a skeptical board member named Aaron found themselves intertwined in ways numbers could not chart. They shared meals at a nearby pizza place owned by Marco, a small man with flour on his sleeves who became an unlikely ally. Over thin crust slices, the group traded stories and grievances. Marcus told of a childhood porch that learned to dance. Emma drew pictures of light. Vivian, surprisingly, chose to join once, and the pizza place softened something in her iron. They argued about technique, about consent, about whether a corporation could gift something back without taking its soul. "What do you want the legacy to be?" asked Rosa one evening between bites. "To be generous without performance," Marcus replied.
to create spaces where people get to choose their applause. The dinner scene included 5 sensory cues: the aroma, bubbling cheese, the warmth of a paper plate, the sting of red pepper flakes, the slap of a napkin, and the sticky residue on fingers that felt like proof. Through these small humanizations, Vivian began to see not a narrative to own, but faces to protect. Secondary characters like Marco the Pizziolo, Aaron the board member, Dr. Rivera, Rosa, and Daniel all took positions, some supportive, some transactional, and those positions mattered. A conspiratorial plot from an outside PR rival attempted to spin the story into an opportunistic ploy, but the group's collective testimony, honest and messy, pushed back. They began to plan a public demonstration that would not exploit Emma, but would show the center's work, a balance between visibility and consent. Pressure built as the antagonistic forces sharpened. A rival media outlet dug for a headline and found a past article where Vivian had cut funding to a smaller nonprofit. They framed the current story as PR surgery. Aaron, the cautious board member, fretted about donor reactions. A leaked internal memo suggested monetizing the program, earning the ire of grassroots advocates. Marcus felt watched, as if his broom had been turned into a symbol people wanted to hang a flag on. The tension in this phase required expanded reflection. Marcus remembered his wife's smile when she first stood after surgery, and the fear that the same grin could be repurposed into a glossy fundraiser made his stomach tighten. He thought of Anna's last words about honesty and touch. He remembered the way the council had once rewarded polished tragedies. The team convened to draft a response, a public event with full consent, transparent funding, and legal agreements that limited imagery to what Emma and her guardian permitted. They consulted a lawyer who outlined in clear terms how release forms work and what rights guardians retain versus institutional rights. The legal steps were explained briefly in accessible terms. Signing a release grants the institution permission to use imagery for specified purposes, typically time-limited and often revocable within a certain window. Consent must be informed, with clear descriptions of intended use and a contact for questions. This 300-character procedural clarification provided the framework for an ethically minded public reveal. Vivian wrestled with the tension between a controlled narrative and the risk of being accused of hypocrisy. The climax unfolded in a boardroom that smelled of varnish and coffee, where photographs had been arranged on a long table like evidence. The opposition sat in velvet chairs, a lobby of investors and reporters stitched to the scene. Marcus stood in a corner, Emma in her chair beside him, and Vivian at the head of the table. A well-placed slideshow intended to showcase corporate leadership instead called witnesses. Daniel tried to open with talking points about strategy and stewardship. "We are proud to present a program that demonstrates our commitment," he began, his voice polished. But Marcus stopped the rehearsed rhythm by standing and asking for a minute of plain speech. What followed was a public exchange of 8 to 10 verbal turns that laid bare motives and courage. Marcus spoke of small mercy. Vivian spoke of responsibility. Aaron questioned sustainability. Rachel, a caregiver from the center, testified to incremental changes. A skeptical journalist asked what victims receive when corporations gain. The conversation was dense, direct, and intimate. Marcus recounted a specific moment when Emma chose to step, and he asked the room to consider what it costs to own someone's recovery. Vivian, moved in a way that bypassed corporate strategy, admitted that she had feared loss, and that fear had translated into control. She apologized to Emma in a voice stripped of corporate veneer. The audience responded with quiet first, then growing applause. The board, seeing both moral clarity and public support, voted to fund a community program that would be transparent and run with independent oversight. The decisive blow to the antagonist's cold narrative was not a scandal, but an admission, proof that humility can change policy. The scene used sensory textures, a creak of leather under pressure, the cool glare of projector light, the rustle of paper, the metallic clink of a coffee spoon, and the warmth of hands joining,
to seal the moment. Reputations shifted. The lobby's interest became a different kind of investment, one in people, not only in perception. The fallout was both immediate and gentle. Contracts were rewritten, funds allocated with stipulations for consent, and a new board liaison named Rachel became a steady voice for transparency. Vivian joined a committee that emphasized participant-led narrative control. Marcus was offered a formal role coordinating volunteers, with a modest stipend and clear terms that protected privacy. Secondary characters tightened into a network. Rosa designed curriculum modules, Dr. Rivera audited clinical outcomes, Marco installed a free pizza night for families, Daniel retooled PR to focus on process rather than spectacle, and Sam volunteered to escort families to sessions when needed. Moments of tension remained, an angry comment thread, an opportunistic donor demanding naming rights, but the core relationship between Marcus and Emma had become a compass for choices. They developed a ritual. Every Friday, a small group gathered in the studio for movement and art. No cameras allowed. The broom that had once been a prop returned to its practical life, but now it bore a ribbon as symbol rather than instrument. The symbolic object returned in different forms: a disc in a memory box, a signed release that emphasized consent, a plaque in the studio that read, "Here we ask first." The public confrontation had turned into policy change and personal healing. The epilogue traced time in 3 careful moments. 1 month later, the studio opened its doors to a core group of participants. A sign announced free weekly sessions with capacity for 30 people. The inaugural class filled within hours. Marcus coordinated schedules, checking attendance, and noting that Emma chose to lead a warm-up in the second meeting. The program reported measurable improvements. Average voluntary engagement rose by 12% across the first month. The center published a simple transparency report explaining funding sources and consent practices. Local press coverage emphasized the families served rather than corporate photo ops. The sensory details were domestic and real: the ribboned broom leaning against a wall, the scent of pizza from Marco's shop drifting in, the feel of wear on a well-used disc. 1 month after the lobby dance, the space buzzed with quiet industry and small triumphs. 3 months later, the studio had formalized a curriculum and trained 6 community volunteers under Marcus's direction. Dr. Rivera and Rosa presented at a local conference about integrating volunteer-led movement with clinical goals, using anonymized data. 40% of participants showed improved initiation steps. Parent-reported affect improved in 60% of cases. The board approved a 3-year seed fund to expand the studio model to 2 more neighborhoods. Vivian sat in a session once a week, sharing coffee with parents and listening rather than dictating. The center began offering sliding-scale access and partnered with Marco's Pizzeria to provide family nights. The studio's small disc program had become a modest protocol, and names like Aaron, Daniel, Marco, Rosa, Dr. Rivera, Lena, Sam, and Rachel were embedded in funding memos and gratitude lists. The sensory record contained echoes: the warm glow of string lights over a rehearsal area, the taste of cheap coffee that somehow tasted of belonging, the texture of new mats that crinkled underfoot, the chorus of children's laughter, and the periodic applause that was no longer orchestrated but spontaneous. 6 months later, a community program named Ask to Dance received recognition from a local foundation and a small grant that supported outreach. The center recorded 100 sign-ups in its first semester. Emma, who once lived in silence, now volunteered short moments to teach other children a step she had named the Brave One. Vivian initiated a scholarship fund in memory of Marcus's late wife, a gesture that acknowledged personal debt and created tangible legacy. The program published a follow-up report with precise numbers and human stories. 300 families reached via outreach events, a 25% increase in voluntary participation among previously non-responsive members, and an independent audit that praised the consent-first model. The broom, no longer merely a tool, hung above the studio door as a symbol, a reminder that dignity begins with a question. The final sensory tableau was warm and crowded. A ribboned broom, a disco-like light that Marcus had once mocked, now hung as a modest disc. The smell of pizza, the sound of a community choir practicing, and the light on a plaque that named donors and volunteers equally. A handshake between Marcus and Vivian closed not a transaction but a promise to keep asking and to keep listening. In the end, the concrete outcomes were measurable and the human ones were deeper. The center established a transparent funding structure with a public dashboard that listed expenditures and program metrics. The legal paperwork that had once worried staff became a model for consent-centered outreach replicated by 2 other centers. Marcus gained a formal position coordinating volunteers and workshops with a modest salary that acknowledged his labor. Emma's mobility continued to improve in small increments, and, more importantly, her agency grew. She began to assert choices about when to be part of media and when to decline. The community that formed around the studio created a modest legacy, not a corporate brand to be sold, but a pattern of practice that privileged people over publicity. The final image returned to the object that started it all, a broom with a ribbon, hung not as a trophy but as an invitation. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments about a time someone offered you a dance when you needed one. If you want more stories about how small acts change systems and make legacies of care, consider subscribing. The next chapter is already beginning in another studio where someone is ready to ask a question that could change a life.